Vcran Solis stepped off the transport ship and took his first breath of human air. It was a disorienting sensation. The air on his homeworld, Zelthar, was perpetually filtered and recycled, tasting of metal and sterile efficiency. This air was alive. It smelled of rich soil, of a sweet, cloying scent from a nearby flowering vine, and of the sharp, green perfume of a vast expanse of grass that rippled like a golden ocean under the light of an alien sun. The Zeltari historian looked around at the colony called New Montana, and he felt a profound, almost clinical sense of pity for the creatures who had built it. The humans had nestled their little town in a wide valley between rolling, green hills. Neat white houses with cheerful red roofs stood in tidy rows. Fields of golden wheat, which Vcran knew from his briefing was a terrestrial staple, moved like water in the wind. The sound of children laughing as they chased each other through the central square was a high, piercing note of unguarded joy. It was all so simple, so fragile, so naive. Vcran was a product of a much older and, in his estimation, wiser civilization. He had traveled across the galaxy for 200 of his years, observing the rise and fall of empires, the slow death of stars, and the frantic, self-destructive scramble of younger species. He had watched the reptilian race burn their own world to cinder in a nuclear holocaust over a territorial dispute. He had documented the silent, chilling assimilation of an entire culture by a hive mind consciousness. He had seen the dark, hungry spaces between the stars and understood the fundamental rule of cosmic existence. Only the strong, the cautious, and the ruthless survived. Now, the Galactic Council, in its infinite and often misguided wisdom, had sent him to study these humans, a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel a mere 3 centuries ago, a blip in the galactic timeline. He already knew what he would write in his initial report. The humans were soft. They were governed by ephemeral, chaotic emotions. They dedicated precious resources to building schools and planting flower gardens, while the galaxy around them grew dark with gathering danger. They had no concept of the true nature of the void. They had no idea what was coming for them. A human male approached Gran, his stride confident and his face split by an easy smile. He was tall for his species, with short brown hair and eyes the color of the clear sky above them. He wore a simple, practical uniform with a badge that read Colonial Defense Force. "You must be the Zelthari observer," the human said, his voice warm. He extended a hand, a greeting gesture Vcran had studied but still found vaguely unsanitary. "I'm Jack Morrison, commander of the Defense Force here. Welcome to New Montana." Vcran grasped the hand. Human skin was warm and dry, a stark contrast to his own cool, scale flesh. "Thank you, Commander. I am Vcran Solis. I will be staying for several months to complete my assessment of your colony." "Study away," Jack said with a laugh that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Not much to see here, I'm afraid. Just farmers and families trying to build something good." That was exactly the problem, Vcran thought. These humans did not understand that the galaxy did not care about good. The galaxy was cold, vast, and utterly indifferent. It was a predator, and it devoured the weak without a second thought. Over the next few days, Vcran conducted his observations with meticulous precision. He walked the pristine streets of the colony, his data slate always in hand. He visited the single schoolhouse, where young humans learn mathematics, history, and something called art, the creation of aesthetically pleasing but functionally useless objects. He watched farmers tend their crops with a level of care and patience that he found inefficient. He saw doctors treat the sick with gentle hands, and builders raise new homes with communal effort. The humans were always busy, always working toward some small, personal goal. Yet they also constantly interrupted their labors to engage in social rituals. They stopped to talk, to share meals, to laugh at jokes that Vcran's linguistic processor could translate, but his cultural understanding could not fathom. They seemed to possess a state of being that approximated happiness, a concept his own people had largely purged from their society after the ideological wars, a devastating conflict fueled entirely by passionate belief. To a Zelthari, unchecked emotion was a path to self-destruction. One evening, Commander Morrison invited Vcran to dinner at his home. The historian accepted, viewing it as a prime opportunity to study human domestic interactions. Jack's house was small, almost cramped by Zeltari standards, but it was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. There were images on the walls, photographs, depicting smiling faces in various settings. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes greeted Cran at the door. "This is my wife, Maria," Jack said, a softening in his voice Cran had not heard before. "And somewhere around here is our daughter." As if on cue, a small human child ran into the room. She had her father's sky-colored eyes and her mother's dark hair. She stopped abruptly when she saw Cran, her mouth forming a small O of open curiosity. She stared unabashedly at his gray, scaled skin and his vertically slotted pupils. "Are you a lizard?" she asked, her voice clear and loud. "Katie," Maria said quickly, a hint of embarrassment in her tone. "That's not polite." But Cran found himself making a low, guttural sound that was the closest his species could come to a chuckle. "It is a valid observation," he told the child. "I am a Zeltari. We have scales like your terrestrial lizards, but we are quite different. I come from a world very far from here." Katie's eyes went wide. "How far?" "Many thousands of light years." "What's it like there?" Cran paused. His home world, Zelthar, was ancient and tired. The skies were a perpetual gray with a haze of pollution from wars fought millennia ago. The cities were geometric, cold, and ruthlessly efficient. There were no children running in the streets, no families sharing meals. His people had forgotten how to be happy, trading it for a long, stable, and emotionless existence. "It is different," he said, deciding on the most neutral term. Finally, they sat down to eat. Maria had prepared a roasted fowl with vegetables from their garden. The smell was pungent and organic. Cran could not consume unprocessed alien proteins, but he had brought his own nutrient paste, which he now discreetly consumed from a self-heating pouch. He sat with them anyway, watching the strange little family share their meal. Katie, having exhausted her initial shyness, began a barrage of questions. What did stars look like from his world? Did he have a family? Did his people have pets? Did he like music? Each question was a small chink in his observational armor. "You ask many questions," Cran noted. "She's curious about everything," Jack said, his voice filled with pride Cran found illogical. "Can't stop her from learning." After dinner, Katie fell asleep on the couch while the adults talked. Maria covered her with a knitted blanket and smiled at her daughter with an expression of such fierce, protective love that Cran felt a flicker of discomfort. It was an emotion so powerful, so raw. It felt like a weapon. "She wants to be an explorer when she grows up," Maria said softly, her eyes still on her daughter. "She wants to see all the stars." "The galaxy can be dangerous," Cran stated, a rare, unsolicited piece of advice. Jack nodded slowly, his expression turning serious. "We know, but we can't let fear stop us from dreaming, can we? What kind of life would that be?" Cran had no answer for this. His own people had let fear govern their society for 1,000 years, and it had led them to a safe but stagnant existence. Later that night, he returned to his assigned quarters and opened his journal. He began to dictate his observations. "The humans of New Montana are, as I initially assessed. They are governed by emotion and exhibit a profound naivete regarding the nature of the cosmos. They construct their dwellings with minimal defensive considerations. They allow their offspring to roam freely without apparent fear of predation. They cultivate trees that will take decades to mature, operating under the apparent belief that their fragile society will persist long enough to witness their full growth." He paused, his stylus hovering over the data slate. "They are soft creatures. They have never known a true war of attrition, a genocidal loss, or the existential terror of superior foe. When danger inevitably arrives, as it must, they will shatter. They will either flee or surrender. This is a predictable fate of all weak, unprepared species." He saved the entry and closed his journal, his initial conclusions feeling solid and unassailable. The next morning, he walked through the colony again. He saw Dr. Lisa Huang, the medical officer, teaching a class of adolescents about basic field medicine. He saw Danny, a school teacher, helping students build a small atmospheric probe for a science project. He saw elderly humans sitting in the sun, playing games with carved pieces, and telling stories to rapt youngsters. Everyone smiled at Vcran as he passed. They waved and called out greetings. They asked if he needed anything, if he was comfortable, if he was enjoying his stay. It was exhausting, this relentless, unearned kindness. That evening, he stood on a hill overlooking the colony and watched the twin suns set over the wheat fields. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. The lights in the houses came on one by one, warm and yellow against the deepening dark. It was beautiful. He admitted himself with a grudging sense of aesthetic appreciation. These humans had built something beautiful here. But beauty did not stop projectiles. Kindness did not turn away warships. Love did not protect you from those who saw you as prey. Vcran looked up at the emerging stars. Somewhere out there in the black, hungry eyes were watching. He could feel it in his old bones, a sense of a darkness turning its gaze toward the small, bright candle. Danger was coming, and when it arrived, these soft, smiling humans would learn the terrible truth about the galaxy. He almost felt sorry for them. 3 weeks passed on New Montana. Vcran had settled into a comfortable routine of observation and documentation. The humans continued their peaceful lives. They continued to build and farm and laugh. Nothing seemed to threaten their idyllic existence. Vcran's report was nearly complete, a damning document on the unsustainability of a human colonial model. Then the sky fell. It was a quiet, bright morning when the alarms began to wail. Vcran was in the market square, observing the exchange of goods and the complex social rituals of bartering and small talk. The sound was loud and piercing, cutting through the peaceful air like a shard of glass. People stopped what they were doing, their faces turning toward the sky. Vcran looked up with them. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace. Dozens of them. They were not the sleek, functional vessels of the Terran Navy. These were black and twisted, covered in sharp angles and cruel spikes that served no purpose other than to intimidate. Vcran recognized them immediately, and his 3-chamber heart turned to ice in his chest. The Kvorii had come. The Kvorii were an insectoid species. They were tall and unervingly thin with black chitinous shells and too many jointed legs. They had no eyes that other species could see, but they could sense the bioelectric signature of prey from across a room. They did not build or create or dream. They only took. They were galactic raiders, slavers, and monsters who harvested other species like agricultural crops. Vcran had seen their work before. Empty cities, chains, and cages. Bones picked clean. The silence of a dozen worlds. He began to run toward the Zelthari delegation quarters. His colleagues would be preparing for an emergency evacuation. Their diplomatic shuttle was fast. They could escape before the orbital bombardment began. But then every public screen in the colony lit up with the same image. A Kvorii commander, its mandibles clicking wetly as it spoke in a common galactic language. Humans of this world, you are now the property of the Kvorii collective. Surrender your population within 1 standard hour. Any resistance will result in immediate and total orbital bombardment. Your young will make excellent servants. Your elderly will feed our larvae. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning. The screens went dark. Vcran stood frozen in the street. Around him, humans stared at each other, their faces masks of shock and dawning horror. Some women grabbed their children and held them close. Some men stood with clenched fists, their faces pale, not knowing what to do. This was the end. Vcran had seen it 100 times before. The panic would come next, then the crying, then the inevitable pragmatic surrender. Every species broke when Kvorii came. Every single one. He started moving toward his ship again. There was nothing he could do here. Nothing anyone could do. Then a voice, calm and steady and familiar, came over the colony's public address system. It was Commander Jack Morrison. All civilians, please proceed in an orderly fashion to the designated underground bunkers. Families with children and the elderly have priority. Move quickly, but do not panic. Defense Force personnel, report to your assigned stations immediately. There was a pause. When Jack spoke again, his voice was different. It was still calm, but there was something underneath it, something hard as forged metal. They came for our families. That was their mistake. The broadcast ended. Vcran expected chaos. He expected screaming and running and a breakdown of social order. What he saw instead made him stand still in utter disbelief. The humans moved. They moved with a speed and purpose that was chilling to witness, like a machine coming to life. Mothers picked up their children and walked quickly toward the bunker entrances. Fathers kissed their families goodbye and turned toward the armory. Old people who could barely walk helped even older people into wheelchairs and pushed them toward safety. No one screamed. No one ran in blind panic. They had all become something else in an instant. Vcran saw Danny, the kind school teacher who built robots with children. Danny was no longer smiling. He was methodically checking a pulse rifle with hands that did not shake. When he saw Vcran watching, he nodded once. "You should get to shelter," Danny said, his voice flat and devoid of its usual warmth. "It's going to get ugly." "You cannot fight them," Vcran said, his own voice tight. "The Kvorii have never been defeated in a sustained ground engagement. They will kill you all." Danny looked at him for a long moment, his eyes holding a grim light. "Maybe," he said, "but they're not taking our kids." He turned and jogged toward the eastern defensive wall. Vcran saw Dr. Lisa Huang outside the medical building, directing nurses and civilian volunteers. They were moving critical supplies into the reinforced basement, setting up triage and surgery tables, preparing for mass casualties. "Dr. Huang," Vcran called out, "you must evacuate. You are not a soldier." Lisa paused just long enough to look at him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady as a rock. "Everyone's a soldier now. Observer. Can you hold a pressure dressing?" When Vcran did not answer, she went back to work, her command sharp and clear. He walked through the streets in a daze. Everywhere he looked, the transformation continued. A baker was sharpening his long knives. A mechanic was welding armor plates onto a farming tractor. A grandmother was calmly teaching a group of teenagers how to create incendiary devices from common household chemicals. Where had they learned this? How did they know what to do? Near the armory, Vcran saw a young man named Kyle. He had met Kyle a week ago at a community dinner. Kyle was 22 years old. He worked in the wheat fields. His wife, Emma, was pregnant with their first child. Now Kyle was strapping on a set of body armor. His hands moved with practiced ease, checking straps and buckles. His face was empty of all expression, but his jaw was tight enough to crack stone. Emma stood beside him, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She was not crying. She kissed Kyle's cheek and whispered something in his ear. Vcran's audio enhancer caught the words, "Come back to us." Kyle touched her face gently, a fleeting softness in the midst of the hard reality. "Always," he said. Then he picked up his rifle and walked toward the defense line. Without looking back, Vcran found the Zelthri delegation preparing their shuttle for emergency departure. His colleagues waved him over urgently. "We must leave now," one of them hissed. "The Kvorii will begin their assault within the hour. Anyone still on the surface will be eradicated." Vcran looked back at the colony. He could see humans taking positions along the makeshift walls. He could see them digging trenches and setting traps. He could see children being led into bunkers by parents who were trying to smile for them. "I am staying," he heard himself say. His colleagues stared at him as if he had suddenly become unhinged. "The humans will fall," one insisted. "They always fall. It is the way of things." "Perhaps," Vcran said, his gaze fixed on the defiant little town. "But I need to see what happens. I need to understand." The shuttle left without him. Vcran watched it rise into the sky and disappear into the safety of hyperspace. He was alone now, trapped on a world that would soon burn. He made his way to a reinforced observation bunker near the command center. Commander Morrison was there, a large tactical display glowing in front of him as he gave orders to his officers. He saw Vcran enter and nodded briefly. "Thought you would have left with your people," Jack said, his voice strained but steady. "I am a historian," Vcran replied. "I record what I see." Jack smiled, but it was not the warm smile from dinner 3 weeks ago. It was the grim smile of a man who had accepted a terrible price. "Then watch closely," he said. "You're about to see what humans do when you threaten our children." Above them, the Kvorii fleet began its descent. Drop ships, black and ugly, filled the sky like a plague of locusts. The ground shook with the sound of their approach. And in the colony of New Montana, 10,000 humans prepared to show the galaxy what they were truly made of. The Kvorii landed in waves. Their dropships crashed down in the fields outside the colony, crushing the golden wheat under their brutal weight. Thousands of warriors poured out, their black shells gleaming in the morning light. They carried weapons that could cut through plasteel and flesh with equal ease. They moved with the speed and hunger of predators who had never known defeat. They expected prey. They expected fear. They expected the soft little humans to run and hide and beg for their miserable lives. They were wrong. Vcran watched in the observation bunker as the first wave advanced toward the eastern wall. The Kvorii moved with terrifying confidence, their mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter among their kind. They had done this 1,000 times before. They knew how it would end. The humans waited in silence. They did not fire. They did not move from their positions. The Kvorii reached the outer perimeter markers, crude wooden posts stuck in the ground. Still, the humans waited. Then, Commander Morrison's voice came over the radio, a single, cold word. Now. The ground exploded. Mines, cleverly buried in the wheat fields, tore through the Kvorii ranks. Fire, shrapnel, and screaming filled the air. Before the survivors could react, the humans opened fire from the walls. It was not the random shooting of a panicked militia. It was precise, coordinated, and lethally efficient. Every bullet found its target. Every Kvorii that fell was replaced by another, but the humans did not stop. They fired and reloaded and fired again with a chilling discipline. Vcran had never seen anything like it. The Zeltri had fought wars, but their soldiers followed orders with cold, logical efficiency. These humans were different. They fought with something that burned in their eyes. They fought like every bullet was an act of personal vengeance. The first wave broke. The Kvorii retreated, leaving hundreds of their dead and dying in the ruined fields. But they came again and again and again. By midday, the eastern wall had fallen under the sheer weight of numbers. The Kvorii pushed into the colony streets, and the real nightmare began. Vcran watched through camera feeds as the battle moved through the town. Humans fought from every window, every rooftop, every doorway. When they ran out of bullets, they used knives. When they ran out of knives, they used their hands, their teeth, anything they could. He saw a group of farmers hold a bridge for 6 hours against a force 10 times their size. They died one by one, but they did not retreat. The last man standing, an old farmer named Henry, detonated explosives strapped to his chest when Kvorii finally swarmed his position. He took 30 of them with him. He saw Dr. Lisa Huang operating on wounded soldiers in the basement while the building above her burned. When a Kvorii warrior broke through the door, she killed it with a single, precise thrust of her surgical knife to a gap in its neck armor before returning to her patient. Her hands never stopped moving. He saw Danny, the school teacher, leading a group of teenagers through enemy lines to rescue children trapped in a collapsed bunker. Danny took 3 pulse rifle rounds during the mission. He did not stop until every child was safe. Then he collapsed, dying with a smile on his face as he looked at the children he had saved. But the thing that haunted Vcran most came on the second day. He was monitoring communications when he heard the report. Bunker 7 has been hit by orbital fire. Direct strike. Structural integrity is 0. No survivors. Vcran knew what Bunker 7 was. It was a primary shelter for civilians in the eastern sector. It was where Emma had been sent, Kyle's pregnant wife. He switched camera feeds frantically until he found Kyle. The young man was crouched behind a burned-out vehicle, methodically reloading his rifle. A soldier ran up to him and said something. Vcran could not hear the words, but he saw Kyle's face. For a moment, nothing happened. Kyle just stared at the soldier who had delivered the news. His hands stopped moving. His whole body went still. Vcran expected him to break, to scream, to cry. That was what any sane creature would do. Kyle did not scream. He did not cry. His face simply emptied. Every emotion, every trace of the kind young man who worked in the wheat fields, disappeared. What remained was something that made Vcran's scales go cold. It was a void, a black hole of grief that had collapsed into a singularity of pure, absolute purpose. Kyle finished reloading his rifle. He stood up. He checked the grenades on his belt. Then he started walking toward the enemy lines. "Kyle!" someone shouted. "Kyle, stop!" He did not stop. He did not run. He just walked straight and steady toward the Kvorii position. They shot at him. He took a hit in the shoulder and another in the leg. And he kept walking. He raised his rifle and started firing. His aim was perfect. Every shot killed. When he reached the enemy position, he was out of ammunition. He pulled the pins on all his grenades at once. The explosion lit up the street. When the smoke cleared, Kyle was gone. So were the 47 Kvorii soldiers in that sector. Vcran sat in the observation bunker and could not move. He had seen death before. He had seen war before. But he had never seen anything like the look on Kyle's face in those final moments. It was not anger. It was not despair. It was a fury so pure and absolute that it burned away everything else. The Kvorii kept coming. The humans kept dying. But they did not break. They did not surrender. Every street became a death trap. Every building became a fortress. Every human became a weapon. By the end of the second day, the Kvorii had taken half the colony, but they had paid for every meter of ground with their own blood. Their commanders were confused. Their warriors were afraid for the first time in their lives. These humans were supposed to be soft. They were supposed to be easy prey. Instead, they fought like creatures who had nothing left to lose. Commander Morrison was wounded in the fighting. A Kvorii blade had cut deep into his side, but he refused to leave the command center. He stood over the tactical display, blood soaking through his bandages, and directed the defense. "Sir, you need medical attention," an officer said. Jack shook his head, his gaze locked on the display. "Not until it's over. Not until they're all safe." Vcran approached him carefully. "Commander, why do you keep fighting? You cannot win this battle. Your people are dying." Jack looked at him with eyes that had seen too much in 2 days. "We were never fighting to win," he said quietly. "Then why?" "We're fighting to hurt them," Jack said, his voice a low growl. "We're fighting to make them bleed so badly that they will never, ever come back. We're fighting so that the next colony, the next world, the next group of kids playing the streets will be safe." He turned back to the display. "They came for our families. Now they learn what that means." That night, the sky lit up with new lights. More ships dropping out of hyperspace. Many ships. For a moment, Vcran thought it was a second Kvorii fleet. Then he saw the markings on the vessels. The double-headed eagle of the Terran Navy. The human fleet had arrived, and hell was coming with it. The Terran fleet cut through the darkness of space like a blade. 20 warships, led by the carrier Resolute under the command of Admiral Beth Lawson. They had traveled for 3 days at maximum speed, burning out engines and pushing their crews to the absolute limit. They had come because of one message: Kvorii attacking New Montana. Civilians under siege. Send everyone. The Kvorii fleet, still 30 strong, turned to meet them. The insects clicked their mandibles in satisfaction. They still had the numbers. They would destroy these human reinforcements and finish harvesting the colony. Admiral Lawson stood on the bridge of the Resolute and studied the enemy formation. She was 53 years old with gray hair cut short and a face made of stone. She had fought the Kvorii before, 20 years ago. She had seen what they did to the people they captured. "Admiral," her tactical officer said, "enemy fleet is moving to intercept. They outnumber us 2-1. "I can count," Beth said calmly. "Orders." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes tracing the enemy ships on the tactical plot. Then she opened a channel to her entire fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Lawson. Below us is a colony of 10,000 people. Farmers, teachers, children. For 3 days, they have held against these monsters with nothing but rifles and courage. They are waiting for us." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The Kvorii came here to take human children and put them in chains. They came to turn our families into food and slaves. There will be no prisoners today. There will be no mercy. We will destroy every ship, kill every enemy, and burn their fleet so completely that the Kvorii will tell stories about this day for 1,000 years. Her voice hardened into diamond. All ships, execute attack pattern Omega. No quarter. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. The Terran ships did not fight like a fleet. They fought like a pack of starving wolves. They moved with coordination that should have been impossible, each vessel covering the others, exploiting every weakness in the Kvorii formation with terrifying speed. Vcran watched from the ground, monitoring the space battle on surviving sensors. He saw human fighters swarm around the Kvorii capital ships like angry hornets. He saw destroyers make what appeared to be suicide runs against enemy weapon systems, clearing paths to the heavier cruisers. The Kvorii were not prepared for this. They were used enemies who retreated, who tried to survive. These humans did not care about survival. They cared only about destruction. Within 2 hours, the Kvorii fleet was in chaos. A dozen of their ships were burning hulks. Their formation had collapsed. Their admiral ordered a retreat. Admiral Lawson's response was broadcast on all frequencies. Negative. You don't get to leave. The Terran ships pursued with relentless fury. Every Kvorii vessel that tried to flee was hunted down and destroyed. The human pilots flew with reckless precision, pushing their craft beyond all safety limits. Some of them died in the pursuit. They did not stop. One Kvorii commander transmitted a surrender request. He offered to withdraw and never return. He offered prisoners. He offered anything. Admiral Lawson did not even respond. Her ships continued firing until his vessel exploded. That evening, Vcran sat with Commander Morrison on a hill overlooking the colony, the same hill where he had stood 6 months ago, pitying the soft humans who did not understand the dangers of the galaxy. "You think differently about us now," Jack said. It was not a question. "Yes," Vcran admitted. "I was wrong about your species." "Very wrong." Jack smiled tiredly. "Most people are. They see us smile and laugh, and build schools and plant flowers. They think that's all we are. It is not." "No," Vcran agreed, "but it's the part you prefer, the part you choose to be." "The other part, the fury," Jack said, his voice low, "we keep locked away. We don't want it. We don't enjoy it. But when someone forces us to open that door..." He trailed off, looking up at the stars. "I have to ask you something," Vcran said. "When you fought, when you killed, did you feel anything? Guilt? Doubt?" Jack was quiet for a long time. "I felt everything," he said finally. "I felt the fear and the anger and the grief all at once. But under all of it, I felt something else. Something that told me this was right. That protecting my family, my people, was worth any price. Even the price of becoming a monster." Jack turned to look at him. "I'm not a monster, Vcran. Monsters enjoy what they do. I hated every moment of it. But I would do it again 1,000 times because the alternative was watching my daughter put in chains." Vcran nodded slowly. He finally understood. 10 years later, Vcran Solis published his account of the Battle of New Montana. It was titled The Fury of Humans, and it spread across the galaxy like wildfire. In his book, he wrote, "I have traveled among many species. I have seen empires and armies and weapons that could destroy worlds. But I have never seen anything more terrifying than a human defending their family. Other species fight for territory, for resources, for power. Humans fight for love, and that makes them unstoppable." He warned the galaxy about the quiet humans with their schools and farms and laughing children. He warned them that this softness was not weakness. He warned them that underneath the kindness was something ancient and terrible, a fury that waited to be awakened. "Do not," he wrote, "make the mistake of thinking they are prey. They are not. They are patient. They are generous. They are forgiving. But there's a line that must never be crossed. Threaten their children, their families, their homes, and you will see the true face of humanity, and it will haunt you forever." The book became required reading in military academies across the galaxy. The Kvorii, when they finally learned what happened to their fleet, did not send more ships. They avoided human space entirely, and they would continue to do so for 100 years. On a warm evening on the Zelthri homeworld, an old Vcran Solis woke from a nightmare. He sat up in bed, his scales damp with sweat, his 3 hearts racing. He had dreamed of Kyle again, the young man walking toward the enemy lines with that empty face. The silence before the storm. The fury that had burned away everything human and left something pure and terrifying behind. Vcran got out of bed and walked to his window. The city lights of his home world stretched out before him, cold and efficient. There were no children playing in the streets, no families eating dinner together, no laughter. He thought about New Montana, about Katie Morrison, who was now a grown woman with children of her own, about the colony that had rebuilt itself into something even more beautiful than before, about the humans who smiled and farmed and taught and loved. They were still out there, building their peaceful worlds, still laughing, still dreaming, still hoping, and still carrying that terrible fury locked away in their hearts, waiting for anyone foolish enough to awaken it. Vcran closed his eyes and saw Kyle's face one last time. The silence, the walk, the explosion. It would haunt him forever. But perhaps, he thought, that was exactly as it should be. Perhaps the galaxy needed to remember what humans could become. Perhaps fear was the only thing that would keep the peace. He returned to bed, but he did not sleep. He lay in the darkness and listened to the silence of his world and thought about the strange, terrifying, beautiful creatures called humans. And he knew with absolute certainty that the galaxy would never be the same.